The influence of African musical styles, melodies, and even instruments on early American music is little appreciated today, but their importance cannot be overemphasized. This presentation has been prepared by the Parlor Songs Association and is intended to give you a short history of the evolution of popular song and the tremendous contributions made by black composers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Our journey actually begins with one of our greatest white composers, Stephen Foster. Many of you are no doubt familiar with one of Foster's very first songs, "Oh, Susanna."
Oh, da 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 dee do do. I did I did I did I die die did I die 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 die. I did I did I die die did I lie lie did I.
Foster was born in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania on July 4, 1826, but he spent his formative years in Cincinnati, Ohio, just across the river from Kentucky, a slave state. Self-taught as a musician and composer, his deepest influence as a child was hearing the Negro spirituals when a household servant would take him to her church whenever his parents were away. There's no doubt that he was a sympathetic chronicler of the plight of the slaves, and much of his music is infused with the dialect. One of his most famous songs tells the story of an elderly slave who is close to the end of his life, and he can hear all his dead friends and loved ones calling to him.
Gone are the days when my heart was young and gay. Gone are my friends from the cotton fields away. I hear their gentle voices calling.
Foster died penniless in 1864, and with his death, American music lost its most eminent leader. It is possible that the genre was so new that no one, or few others, had really internalized it. As a result, without Foster's lead, there were very few followers. And we see a period of about 20 years that we at Parlor Songs have termed the dead zone of American music. The Civil War created an entirely new social landscape. The Old South and its institutions were wiped out and replaced by a new era. The end of the plantation system changed the social status of black America. During the times of slavery, much of the music sung by the slaves themselves was in the form of the spiritual. Of course, this is to be expected. They saw no hope in this life, so they sang of the life to come. Here's an example of a very popular spiritual from that period.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses,
But even during slavery, there was an upbeat style that had also come from Africa. This style came to be known as the cakewalk. In essence, a cakewalk was a mildly syncopated march originated by slaves on southern plantations. In 1950, ragtime composer Shepherd Emmons told of his memories related to him by his parents from Tennessee. He said, "The cakewalk was originally a plantation dance, just a happy movement they did to the banjo music because they couldn't stand still. It was generally on Sunday when there was little work, and the slaves, both young and old, would dress up in hand-me-down finery to do a high-kicking, prancing walk-around. They were really doing a takeoff on the manners of the white folks in the big house, but the masters who had gathered around to watch the fun actually missed the point. It's supposed to be that the custom of a prize started with the master giving a cake to the couple that did the proudest movement. So many of you have probably heard the expression, "that takes the cake." Well, this is where it comes from. This brings us up to the late 1890s and the formulation of a brand new style of music that was the real forerunner of what would become jazz, an American music form. While the cakewalk was a mildly syncopated march, ragtime took syncopation to a whole new level. The word ragtime means syncopated time. It sprung up as a musical form towards the end of the 19th century, and this was one of a number of forms which had their roots in this time period. Ragtime wasn't so much a deliberate crafting by music scholars, but more the result of experimentation and informal learning by example, often self-taught musicians who played on the street and in bars. Composers like Scott Joplin, who is considered the father of ragtime, played the music to large audiences and published it so that its popularity began to spread. Joplin's most famous rag is the Maple Leaf Rag, published in 1899. Now, in its day, ragtime was not a popular style. For one thing, it was seen as corrupting the morals of the young at the time, the very same arguments that were put forth by adults in the 1950s when rock and roll came along, and what many adults today think of rap and hip-hop. But just as importantly, ragtime had no words, and it was very hard to play. Remember, this was before radio. One of the principal sources of entertainment on a weekend afternoon was gathering around the piano in the parlor and singing songs. Ragtime was just too hard for mom or grandma to play, and, as I said, it had no words. Although at the time it wasn't accepted in the popular culture, within the music community it was revolutionary. However, it would take another 10 to 12 years for songwriters to refine the syncopation of ragtime into something that would make a popular song. Before we go any further, there's another particular style that is also derived from former slaves. This is a style of a cappella singing in four-part harmony called barbershop. The style of singing in close harmony had its roots in England. It came to the United States in the mid-19th century, where it was greatly influenced by the Negro spiritual. Just to give you an example of this style, here is a song by a quartet called Power Play, which won the gold medal as the best quartet in the world in 2003.
You shine so bright, and the thrill of your sight makes all the living worthwhile. My world forever, my beacon every mile, the sunshine of your smile.
As I said a moment ago, while not a popular song style, ragtime had a great influence on songwriters who began writing songs called rags, although they were only loosely based on the conventions of genuine ragtime. Up in Harlem, there were a number of black composers working to turn the syncopation of ragtime into a style that would appeal to the general public. One of these was Shelton Brooks. His first big hit came in 1910 and was entitled Some of These Days. One of the biggest stars on Broadway at that time was Sophie Tucker. Once a performer became a star, they were inundated and pestered endlessly by songwriters to try and get them to sing their songs. And it had gotten so bad for Tucker that she just shut the doors completely and wouldn't see any of them. But one day her maid, Molly Elkins, went to her and scolded her for not giving these black songwriters up in Harlem a chance. So Sophie Tucker said, "All right, bring him in." So Shelton Brooks came in and he played Some of These Days. And here's what she said in her autobiography. She said, "The minute I heard the song, I could have kicked myself for almost losing it. A song like that, it had everything. Hasn't it proved it? I've been singing it now for 30 years. I made it my theme song. I've turned it inside out, singing it every way imaginable as a dramatic song, a novelty song, a sentimental ballad, and always the audience has loved it."
Some of these days, you'll miss me, honey. Some of these days, you're gonna be so lonely. You'll miss my hugging, you're gonna miss my kissing, you're gonna miss me, honey, when I'm far away. And when you leave me, you know it's gonna grieve me, gonna miss your big fat mama some of these days.
Brooks' biggest hit song came in 1917 called Darktown Strutter's Ball, a song for which he collected over $100,000 in royalties. This was before the phonograph became widely used, and the way people bought music in those days was buying the actual sheet music to play at that parlor piano that I mentioned earlier. Black composers oftentimes were not able to negotiate the same royalty contracts as white composers. This had more to do with the management of the publishing houses than with the people who were actually turning out the music. Let's say that Brooks received 3% of the gross. When you consider that sheet music sold for around 50 cents a copy, that means Darktown Strutter's Ball sold at least 3 million copies. Here's a short clip of Brooks himself later in life.
I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this lovely ovation. And I think I have time for one little number. So what would you like to hear? Yeah, I expected that. Now they serve all kinds, delicious eat, fried chicken and all them fancy meats. But that pastry cook, bless her soul, showed us serve good jelly roll. I know 'cause I had some hole in the wall.
Another of America's great songwriters also had a tremendous impact in turning ragtime into popular song. This was Irving Berlin. While you may not recognize his name, it's sure you recognize his work. Here's perhaps the most famous song he ever wrote.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear.
In 1911, Berlin published his first big hit, capitalizing on the ragtime theme, but in a form for popular tastes. The song was Alexander's Ragtime Band.
Come on in here, come on in here, Alexander's Ragtime Band. Come on in here, come on in here, it's the best band in the land. They can play a bugle call like you never heard before. So natural that you want to go to war. That's just the bestest band what am on the honey lamb. And if you'd care to hear the Swanee River play in ragtime, come on in here to Alexander's Ragtime Band.
That was Berlin himself singing his song. The trouble is, the song is not ragtime at all. It's a march tempo. But just the word ragtime in its name was enough to make it a hit. With just this one song, Berlin became very wealthy at the tender age of 23. This type of music spawned an entire era in American popular music that came to be called the Tin Pan Alley era. Tin Pan Alley was a real alley on East 14th Street near 3rd in New York. It got its name from the sound of all the pianos and other instruments playing all at the same time in the various musical publishing houses through the open windows. Someone said that the noise sounded like someone beating on a tin pan, and the name stuck. At least that's the legend. But it was more than just a place. As I said, Tin Pan Alley has come to be known for an entire era of songwriting when many musical ideas mixed together to form American popular music. Tin Pan Alley brought together many styles: blues, jazz, musical scores, and ragtime. It became a melting pot for culture and musical tastes. Despite racial lines, and although limitations still existed, the art of music was still able to emerge. And this is an important point to note, for while intense racial hostility and segregation still existed in the country, it did not exist among the performers and the songwriters themselves. Soon the attention of Tin Pan Alley shifted from ragtime to other popular topics, such as dances like the foxtrot, and other musical forms such as blues and then later jazz. As the boons of blues and jazz crept into the consciousness of America, a number of black composers gained their long-awaited recognition. One of these was W.C. Handy, who is widely known as the father of the blues. Though he was only one of many musicians who played the distinctive American form of music known as the blues, he is credited with giving it its contemporary form. Handy was born in Florence, Alabama. His father was a pastor of a small church, so he was very much influenced by the gospel music he heard in his father's church. Growing up, he apprenticed at carpentry, shoemaking, and plastering. He bought his first guitar, which he had secretly saved for by picking berries and nuts, without his parents' permission. When he brought it home, his father asked him, "What possessed you to bring a sinful thing like that into our Christian home?" And he ordered Handy to take it back where it came from. But his father did then enroll him in organ lessons. Young Handy didn't much care for the organ, and he moved on to learn the cornet. He joined a local band as a teenager, but he kept this fact a secret from his parents. He purchased a cornet from a fellow band member and spent every free minute practicing. His most famous song is the St. Louis Blues, published in 1914. sun go down. 'Cause my baby, she done left this town. I got the St. Louis blues, just as blue as I can be. That gal's got a heart like a rock cast into the sea. Or else she wouldn't have gone so far from me. With the exception of Handy's St. Louis Blues in 1914 and Sheldon Brooks' song Darktown Strutter's Ball in 1917, the years during World War I were somewhat dry years for black composers. They kept writing songs, of course, but they really had no big hits. After the war, however, there were a number of composers and musicians who would contribute to the music of what came to be called the Roaring Twenties. One of these was James P. Johnson. He wrote the song that more than any other is associated with that decade, the Charleston. Johnson is also known as the father of stride piano. Harlem Stride was an evolution of East Coast ragtime infused with elements of the blues. It's distinguished from ragtime by several essential characteristics. One of these is that ragtime introduced sustained syncopation, while stride pianists introduced a more freely swinging rhythm into their performances. Perhaps the best way to illustrate the stride style is to offer two different versions of the same song. We'll use an old tune from 1899 by Ida Emerson and Joseph Howard called Hello, My Baby. Those of you who have ever watched Warner Brothers cartoons are probably familiar with this song.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
This first version is played exactly the way the song was written. Now we'll hear the same tune played in the Harlem Stride style. can now see how distinctive stride piano is, with a rhythm just like walking or striding. As an aside, I'd like to mention another gentleman. He wasn't a composer, but he did make a tremendous contribution. He was the man that was playing that last clip. His name is J. Lawrence Cook. He was one of the most prolific piano roll makers in history. His output has been estimated at between 10,000 and 20,000 different roll recordings. He was a piano roll maker for the QRS company for nearly 50 years. In the late teens and early 20s, we had the songwriting team of Turner Layton and Henry Creamer. Unfortunately, no photos of Henry Creamer are to be found. Creamer was a lyricist born in 1879 in Richmond, Virginia. One of America's most prominent black songwriters and performers, his career spanned the golden age of Tin Pan Alley, and he was involved in just about every aspect of the music business. John Turner Layton was born in 1894 in Washington, D.C. One of the few successful black composers of the period, he teamed up with Creamer in a vaudeville act. One of their biggest hits, After You've Gone, came in 1918.
After you've gone and left me crying, after you've gone, there's no denying. You'll feel blue, you'll feel sad, you'll miss the bestest pal you've ever had.
In 1922, they wrote Way Down Yonder in New Orleans, a song that is still in the repertoire of Harry Connick Jr.
Guess, where do you think I'm going when the winds start blowing strong? Guess, where do you think I'm going when the nights start growing long? I ain't going east, I ain't going west, I ain't going over the cuckoo's nest. I'm bound for the town that I love the best, where life is one sweet song. In the land of the dreamy scenes, there's a garden of Eden, that's what I mean. Creole babies with flashing eyes softly whisper with tender sighs. Stop, oh, won't you give your lady fair a little smile? Stop, you bet your life you'll linger there a little while. There is heaven right here on earth with those beautiful queens way down yonder in New Orleans.
Next in our stable of great musicians comes Thomas Fats Waller. He was a follower of James P. Johnson, and you can definitely hear the Harlem Stride style in his work.
No one to talk with, all by myself. No one to walk with, but I'm happy on the shelf. Ain't misbehaving, saving my love for you, for you, for you, for you.
Before we conclude, there's a famous black vaudeville team that must be mentioned in connection with the point made earlier about the lack of racism among the composers, musicians, and performers themselves. Eubie Blake and Noble Sissle teamed up around World War I and performed together for many years. There is a story concerning them and an encounter they had with Al Jolson in 1919 that is very instructive on how music actually helped bring the races together. One of America's foremost entertainers was Al Jolson. In fact, he was known as the world's greatest entertainer. That is why he was chosen to appear in the first talking picture, The Jazz Singer, in 1927. While there are many other pictures of Jolson available, this one was chosen deliberately. Today, many people denigrate Jolson because during his early career he appeared in blackface. They argue that this one facet of his career should serve to completely negate everything else he did. The practice of white performers blackening their faces goes back to what was called the minstrel show of the early 1800s. Minstrelsy is the subject of an extensive article on the Parlor Songs website and is beyond the scope of this class. However, the salient fact is that minstrel shows, while they did serve to offer a stereotype of blacks, were also a way for black entertainers to make a living. By the late 1800s, there were troops of black entertainers traveling around doing minstrel shows. In November of 1894, Al G. Fields organized his American Minstrels, an all-black troupe. In June of 1895, they became the Al G. Fields Real Negro Minstrels. And in 1898, that troupe morphed into the Al G. Fields Refined Negro Minstrels. So here were black performers actually blackening their faces and performing minstrel shows. Here are photos of Bert Williams, one of the highest paid black performers of his day. The point here is that these performers were just like performers in every place and every time. They gave the public what it wanted, and these shows served the purpose of introducing white audiences and composers to music and performance styles that they would not otherwise have seen and heard. This brings us back to Jolson, Sissel, and Blake. In December 1919, Sissel and Blake were performing in Hartford, Connecticut, at the same time that Jolson was there appearing in his musical show Sinbad. Shortly after Jolson's death in 1950, Noble Sissel told writer Martin Abramson the following story. Quote, "After we did our first show, we went into a dirty little restaurant to get a bite, but the owner took one look at us and said, 'We don't serve colored people, get the hell out of here.' Well, we were pretty sore about it, but there wasn't anything to do but get out. By accident, we bumped into a reporter from one of the local papers and told him about the incident. Sure enough, the next day the paper carried an item about it, and to our everlasting amazement, we promptly got a call from Al Jolson himself. He was in town with his show, and even though we were two very unimportant guys who he'd never heard of until that morning, he was so mad about that story that he wanted to make it up to us. Well, that night he came over in a big car and said he was taking us to the swellest restaurant in town, and he'd punch anybody in the nose who tried to kick us out. I can't tell you how grateful we were to him, but we told him we didn't like to go anywhere we weren't wanted. Then Jolson said, 'Wait a minute, I know where we can have a good time.' He turned the car around, drove us to a Jewish delicatessen, and treated us to a wonderful meal. Then he bought up a load of pastrami sandwiches and took them out to the car. We sat in the car until the early hours of the morning, eating our heads off and listening to the greatest star in America performing just for us." Sissel, Eubie Blake, and Jolson were friends from that night on. Jolson's well-known theatrics and his promotion of equality on Broadway helped pave the way for many black performers, playwrights, and songwriters. And Noble Sissel, president of the Negro Actors Guild, represented that organization at Jolson's funeral. Here's a clip of Sissel and Blake performing the Downhearted Blues in 1923.
But it's hard to love some gal when that some gal don't love you. I'm so disgusted, heartbroken too. I've got the downhearted blues. Once I was crazy about that gal. She mistreated me all the time.
We've now journeyed from the Civil War through the years to the Jazz Age. It's only fitting that we conclude our look at the contributions of black composers, musicians, and performers with a discussion of America's ambassador of jazz, Louis Satchmo Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was born August 4, 1901 in New Orleans. He came to prominence in the 1920s and became a foundational influence in jazz, shifting the music's focus from collective improvisation to solo performance. Renowned for his charismatic stage presence and voice, almost as much as for his trumpet playing, Armstrong's influence extends well beyond jazz music. By the end of his career in the 1960s, he was widely regarded as a profound influence on popular music in general. He was one of the first truly popular black entertainers to cross over, whose skin color was secondary to his music. We'll end with a clip of Armstrong doing one of his signature tunes, Hello, Dolly.
Hello, Dolly, this is Louis. Dolly, it's so nice to have you back where you belong. You looking swell, Dolly, I can tell, Dolly, you still glowing.
We at Parlor Songs hope that this presentation has been both informative and entertaining. It's our goal to preserve the great heritage of American popular song by introducing this music to a new generation. We also hope that you'll regularly visit our website at www.parlorsongs.org.